religion of Dr. Andrew Wormald. Over the next 10 minutes, I'm going to go through my literary background, my hypotheses, my methods, the results, and what they mean. So a quarter of the world's population is going to be over 60 years of age by 2050 due to the advancement of medicine. So because of this, we need more in-depth research on the quality of life of older adults. So quality of life contains several different facets, including happiness, enriching experiencing, and efficient function. So it's best encapsulated by Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as you can see here on the side. At the bottom of the hierarchy is basic survival needs, such as a place to live and security. As we move up, we can see that the needs get more superficial, so belonging, acceptance, and self-esteem. At the very top is self-actualization needs. So these higher needs are the last to be fulfilled, but are no less important. It's important to go beyond any kind of physical requirements and look at what we have to do to achieve all of these needs according to this hierarchy. So over the course of my research, I was actually really surprised to find there was very little studies done on older populations, and it is important for us to understand that we need to know how to maintain and improve quality of life as we age. So many models of health that have been developed in relation to successful aging look at factors such as the biomedical model of aging, which focuses on medicine, healthy eating, and exercise. So while these are very important, as we saw from the last presentations, it's unrealistic to expect that we can grow old without any of these physical ailments. The biomedical model does not take into account the role of non-physical factors such as religion. Religiosity is defined as devotion to a higher being, and it often involves claiming to be a member of a religious organisation such as Christianity or Buddhism. Here in Ireland, the Catholic Church is the most influential religious body, with almost 4 million people claiming to be a member. There has been a general decrease in religiosity in the West, and in Ireland, although it might not feel like it at times, the role of the Church has been decreasing since the 50s. According to Kramer and Fahey, however, as of 2018, over 60% of people in the US and Europe have described religion as being important to them. Due to this, I think it's reasonable to assume that it still impacts the quality of life of many people. Many studies have noticed the link between quality of life and religion in older adults. A 2015 study in Brazil found that higher participation in religious activity led to higher quality of life scores in older adults. Religious participation can have both emotional and physiological benefits, ranging from the strengthening of societal relationships to decreasing blood pressure. This may be due to the fact that religion is a source of both formal and informal support. Some of us raised here in Ireland, whether or not we're religious today, we all remember going to services just to see our neighbours afterwards. Interestingly, most studies have found slightly stronger effects for men. There are a few explanations for this. One of which is that generally society expects men to be more emotionally vulnerable, and attending these services can give them a safe space to ask for and receive support. So my study looked at restful versus crisis religion. Restful religion referred to someone who was raised religious, so they were religiously educated and often very active in their religious community. Whereas crisis religion is generally experienced by those who have turned to religion in difficult times in their lives. They haven't necessarily been raised religiously or even subscribed to a particular organisation, but they've turned to prayer for support. Studies have shown that crisis religion is closely linked to poor quality of life incomes, with a 2020 study linking it to more depressive symptoms. So why is restful more beneficial? Some studies have suggested that these people have stronger beliefs regarding life after death, which drastically reduces death anxiety, a significant problem in our elderly population. So based on this research, I've developed the following hypothesis. The first one looks at whether or not there is a difference in the predictions of quality of life for older people who are religious. The second one looks at the same predictions for those who have restful versus a crisis religion. And the third one looked at these differences again in men and women. So in order to test the predictive power of religiosity on quality of life, I carried out a secondary analysis using the fourth wave of the Irish Longitudinal Study of Aging, which was carried out in Trinity College Dublin starting in 2009. This dataset looked at Irish adults over 50 years of age. So what is considered restful and crisis religion in the eyes of the Tilda? So I took the liberty to assume that those who consider themselves members of a religious organisation would represent the restful population, while those who attended services but didn't necessarily consider themselves a member represented the crisis religion. This study utilised under 6,000 participants over the age of 50 from around Ireland. There were 2,500 men and 3,200 women in the fourth wave, all of whom were required to fill out 2 questionnaires, one on their own and one in the presence of another investigator. Quality of life was measured using the CASP-19 scale, which was developed in the UK, and religious attendance was binary coded, so I only counted the people who answered yes or no. 3,500 attended services, while under 2,000 reported that they did not. Being a member of our organisation was reported in the same way, so either yes or no. 1,800 reported that they were a member of an organisation, while just under 3,000 said they were not. Note the difference between the amount of people who attended services and who are not members. Around half of those who attended didn't actually consider themselves a member of a religious organisation, which was interesting in itself. 63% of women went to services compared to 57% of men, and 35% of women were members compared to 29% of men. So as noted, this was a predictive study, meant that I would be using multiple regressions. These are statistical tests used to assess the predictive power of a variable such as rest for religion on a measure such as quality of life. It's carried out using SPSS. So with studies using scales, you have to measure the reliability of the scale, so does it measure what I want it to? For my studies, I found it did to an adequate degree, which was enough for me to proceed. In this table, you can see the general spread of the data, which I have outlined above. So my first regression to assess the first hypothesis looked at if religiosity as a whole predicted quality of life scores. Don't worry about the numbers, they look a bit daunting, but they just mean that, yeah, the first hypothesis can be accepted, meaning that religiosity does predict quality of life scores. The second hypothesis looks at the difference between restful and crisis religion in this prediction. To test this, the data was split between members and non-members. Again, the numbers look a bit scary, but don't worry, the important thing is that, yes, restful religion can predict quality of life scores, which is what I expected. Here is where the second hypothesis gets interesting. These figures basically say that crisis religion will also positively predict quality of life scores, which is not what I expected. So due to this, I can't agree with the second hypothesis as they weren't different. Both crisis and restful religion can positively benefit quality of life scores. Finally, the last hypothesis looked at men and women. I carried out different regressions. So the first one looked at religiosity as a whole in women, the second one looked at restful religion in women, and the third looked at crisis religion in women. All of these positively predicted quality of life scores. So similar to the previous hypothesis, no matter what religious style women subscribe to, they can see a benefit in their quality of life scores. Finally, I looked at men. Again, the same situation was carried out, 3 different regressions, religiosity as a whole, restful religion, and crisis religion. Religiosity as a whole and restful religion did both positively predict quality of life, but I noticed that crisis religion did not. So technically I can accept the third hypothesis, but not in the way that I expected, because I expected that men would benefit more from religious attendance. So the results were a mixed bag. I can say for definite that, yeah, religiosity as a whole does positively predict quality of life scores, and so does both restful and crisis religion among men and women together, which, while this is a good thing, it's not what I expected. We can also say that women receive more quality of life benefits than men, which is also not what I expected. From the results, I have to note that the effect sizes are small, but this is perfectly normal in a large sample size. This just means that there's another factor that can impact quality of life that I didn't account for. One of these factors could be the social aspect of religion. As mentioned previously, a lot of people go to services for the sole purpose of seeing people afterwards, and this weekly interaction is going to benefit people, regardless of whether or not they consider themselves a member of an organisation. So what does this mean in a real life context? So basically, it showed the importance of religion in the lives of older people. So whether it's a result of the religious activity itself or some other confounding factor, religion cannot be discounted. The study will expand our understanding of quality of life in our elderly population and could be used in studies such as loneliness studies. We could use the study to justify bringing religious services to people who are housebound with processes such as backyard services. Of course, I can't go without mentioning the impact of the current pandemic. It'd be interesting to see what the process of bringing these services online have done to our elderly populations. So with every study, there will be limitations, and mine is no acceptance. The most obvious is that this is a secondary analysis, meaning that with the current times, I couldn't carry this out with my own participants because it would be very unethical. So I was limited to the data from the tilde. An example of this was that the tilde treated gender as a binary, meaning that the experiences of anyone who was non-gender conforming were not taken into consideration. As the study was set in one point in time, it's very hard to determine causation. So as I only use the fourth wave, I can't exactly tell if people still go to religious services and consider themselves members because they have a better quality of life, or if it's this participation that means that they have a better quality of life. Finally, the study was mostly limited to Christian participants, because as I mentioned previously, a large proportion of the Irish population are Catholic. In future studies, I hope that they can resolve these limitations. It'll be so interesting to see where the future studies on our elderly populations go. Thank you so much for listening. In the next few slides are my references, and I'll take any questions.
Thanks so much for that, Sarah. It's an incredibly interesting topic that you chose, religiosity in Ireland.